wanted to do something fun on the show today with Election Day just a few days away. All you have to do is watch television. They'll say 3 days away, 4 days away. It's like a car sales commercial. Big, big, big. I wanted to bring in Chuck Todd, who I last spoke to about 10 years ago when I was with NBC Sports Radio, working out in New York. And got to talk to him just before the 2016 election, and Chuck Todd was gracious enough to give us some time today on the show because he's also a huge sports nut, as much as he loves politics, and obviously it's what he does. And I am a guy that talks about sports for a living, but is actually a political junkie who worked in news, and I was a communications director for a Republican politician when I was younger. I've run the gamut as well, so this will be a fun conversation. We all want. I say this all the time. We all want to be what somebody else is. You know, like I've talked to people in politics before, and they're like, "Man, I would love to do what you do." And then I talk to people in politics, and I'm like, "Man, I wish I could do what you do." So this will be a fun conversation. I want to begin with some of the recent news in sports. So we're gonna do some sports in this segment, and then the next segment we'll do some political stuff. With the election being next week. I wanted to get your thoughts. We saw the news yesterday that Bob Costas, who is broadcasting royalty, stepping down from his play-by-play roles after 44 years. And he got a lot of criticism in this offseason.
I noticed that.
Yeah. But you know better than anybody. That's the world we live in, social media. People only go on social media to complain. They don't go on there and say, "Wow, that was great." What do you think of when you think of Bob Costas and his career and sort of his legacy? He's not stepping away altogether from broadcasting. He's still at MLB Network and stuff like that. But I'm curious to know what you think of somebody like Bob Costas, who's been so integral to the broadcasting world.
He has. Look, I know him a little, not a lot, but I know him a little. His time at NBC in the later years, my time at NBC, we've had some overlap. And look, he's what I've always thought of him is he and Bryant Gumbel to me were sort of my first guys. Okay, these were the first sort of guys in sports that I followed. I feel like as commentators. Certainly Al Michaels, I got a little bit of Howard Cosell as a kid, but Costas and Gumbel both always felt like thinking man sports fans, right? It didn't. They sort of, to me, and what I love about Bob is that, he makes it accessible both for, that intelligent, overly intelligent baseball fan or the person that's just starting to learn, right? And certainly, look, when I think Bob Costas, I think baseball. Even though, by the way, let me make a book recommendation to you. One of my favorite books on sports ever is a oral history of the ABA. It's called Loose Balls.
Okay.
It's just terrific. It was a former newspaper reporter in, let's say it was Dayton. I think it's Dayton, Ohio. Might have been the Akron. A reporter from the Akron Beacon Journal. But just a terrific, and he participates in it. Costas got his start being the play-by-play guy for the Spirit of St. Louis, which is an ABA team. And it's just the stories he tells and all of that stuff. But look, I just think Costas brought this sort of, he made it so that the idea that hey, you could be a bookworm and like sports. And that's sort of because, look, let's be honest, in the 60s and 70s, there was this, and even in the 80s, sports fans were considered idiots. Non-sports fans were the smart people, right? And I just felt like Costas made a way to make room for everybody.
Yeah, I would agree with that. But I have to ask you, and this is sort of where what you do, what I do, what Bob does, it all crosses over. He's been the brunt of a lot of criticism over the years for that sort of highbrow or higher sort of higher IQ, higher intelligence sort of conversation that he's having. Almost like when Dennis Miller did Monday Night Football, and some of it just went over people's heads.
Didn't land.
It wouldn't land with people. How difficult is it? You did Meet the Press for a dozen years. How difficult is it to hear and see that kind of criticism that undoubtedly he sees? I see it. Everybody thinks it's like sex. Interviewing is like sex, or play-by-play is like sex. Everybody thinks they're the best at it.
Right.
How tough is that to be in that sort of position?
It's about your own psyche, right? How much do you need outside approval?
But did it affect you?
Yourself?
I mean, did it affect you when you would see that? I mean,
of course, at first it would affect a lot.
Yeah.
Right? Of course, it can, and you just had to realize. Look, I'll be honest. So at first, right, when it would happen, I'd come home on a Sunday, I'd be trending on Twitter,
yeah,
and I'd be like, really, they're coming in, and I'm one of the few people in media that would get it left and right. Like as my old EP used to say, he says, the right thinks you're a liberal and the left thinks you're a traitor.
That's like Bill Maher today. That's sort of like Bill Maher today. He gets it from both sides.
And it's, simply because I'm like, I'm just reporting, you just don't like it. I get it. And I used to say, I now understand what people were upset about is that I wasn't biased, meaning I wasn't biased for them, right? Whatever it is, in their mind, if you're not for them, then you must be against them in some perverted way, right? We live in this binary way. I have always sort of enjoyed the gray area. And unfortunately, with social media, the gray area is a very difficult place to live. But at some point, you have to realize the outside world and the social media world are two different places, right? And I can tell, even in politics, you can tell the people that are super online and then the people that sort of go to the grocery store to find out what their constituents are saying. And I noticed that like Marco Rubio and Mike Lee, and frankly, like an AOC, even on the left, Bernie Sanders, these people feel like they spend a lot of time online and they spend a lot of time responding to their sort of online partisans versus your grocery store partisans, which are don't even know half the memes that are happening on social media.
Right.
And after about 3 years, frankly, I started to realize, I'd go to the grocery store after Meet the Press where I was trending, and I think everybody was staring at me. Oh, they're all mad at me in my neighborhood or whatever, right? And then you realize nobody's on Twitter. And so simultaneously, I'm getting criticized over here and having somebody else send me an email, hey, that was great. I really appreciate how you did this or whatever. Ultimately, I used to say, if I'm doing my job at Meet the Press, you should be agitated for at least 5 minutes on the show, no matter what. And the other thing is we have to remember, and I do think this is different between sports and sort of what I would say is political journalism. If you're going to do political journalism right, don't expect to be popular. In sports, obviously, I think popularity matters a little bit. So I would imagine it's a little more impactful there. But I will say one other thing.
There's a lot of people that hate watch, though. There's a lot of people that hate watch.
Of course. Right. Joe Buck was, there was a period of time where it felt like a lot of people loved to hate watch Joe Buck on social media. And I used to think, man, people are giving Buck a hard time. This is ridiculous. Do you know how hard this is? But anyway, I will say this about Costas. I noticed he really got a lot of criticism this last playoff. And I do think this was the first time you thought, maybe people watch the game differently now, and they have a different aspect of what they want out of their announcers. And I think that he's, in that sense, I don't think you got to know your audience and what they want now versus maybe what was the right way to call a ball game 10 years ago.
Deion Sanders at Colorado. Good or I know you're originally from Miami. Yeah. Good or bad for college football?
Ask me next year. The reason I say that is if Deion Sanders is there, I will say it was good. If Deion Sanders leaves because Shador leaves, right, which is the
prevailing wisdom,
then I really feel for Colorado football, right? Then it's this sort of you were just a vehicle, type of thing. But I'm going to take Deion at his word and that he wants to build a program. But to me, I really think we can't judge on whether is Deion into this because he wants to coach his son, and he's been coaching his son all the way up, 2 sons, or is he really serious about this?
Yeah.
And so I look, I think he deserves a ton of credit for moving from last year to this year. He saw what didn't work, and he's trying, so I think he's been better this year for the game than last year for the game. But I do think it will do some damage to if he just leaves when Shador leaves.
Yeah,
that is because then there's something that bothers me about that.
We can't we can't get politicians on the same page to fix anything of import these days. And I know that you've been a bit outspoken on NIL, the state of college athletics. Is there any reason to believe they're going to be able to get involved in this? Do you want them involved in this? How do we?
I think they have to be involved.
I'm out in Las Vegas. Vegas, and we had this young man from UNLV who basically he left because he didn't get his pay or he didn't get what he thought he was promised. And I anticipate there's going to be more of this.
I think they have to get involved. There needs to be some standardized rules. And at this point, once commerce crosses state lines, you can't have a patchwork like this. So I know some people will say Congress has better things to do than to worry about college sports. I will tell you this, every individual member of Congress cares a lot about whether their team, Mitch McConnell was very involved in trying to get Louisville into a major conference. This was not a small thing. He was very involved, lobbying the Big 12 back in the day, lobbying the ACC when it became a pitch to the ACC. So politicians do care a lot, are very parochial about this, right? So they will fight. And certainly some of them are going to be angry if they feel like they're being left out, right? And so I think it's inevitable Congress comes in. Charlie Baker wants Congress to come in. I think the only one that don't is Greg Sankey of the SEC, right? And so what's happening here, I think, is at some point the SEC and maybe ESPN and Fox Sports are going to get tagged with some sort of antitrust lawsuit by other universities or other conferences. And that's probably when Congress, will have to, step in some form or another. Do I hope the free market sort of wins this out and that a couple of these entities that are trying to essentially say, okay, this is ridiculous what we have. There's, two sort of hedge fund backed entities that are out there circulating some proposals for 70 team leagues, 80 team leagues, maybe a little relegation, but create divisions. But the real moneymaker out of it is if you pool the TV rights deal, right, and you have college football negotiate as one entity rather than as, what are we up to, 10 entities right now with the conferences? There's actually going to be more money for everybody. And so the hedge fund guys have figured this out. There's a whole bunch of people that have examined, if you just look at how the NFL manages their TV rights deal versus how the SEC and the Big Ten have sort of basically by, look what ESPN has done. They've actively devalued their own financial, the amount of money they've paid for ACC sports by the way they've treated the SEC and marginalized the ACC. And this is where, I think the ACC ought to sue ESPN for negligence here because they've not been a business partner that's tried to grow the conference. They've actually helped encourage the dissolution of the Big 12, for instance, or they reformat by making room financially for Texas and Oklahoma, which then weakens their other business partner, the ACC. How do you go? This is why I think it's inevitable that lawyers and Congress will be getting involved in this because there's too much money at stake.
You've talked about sports news, daytime shows, sort of morphing into, oh yeah, I absolutely have. Like you, I do my homework. But essentially, when you look at sports television, especially the daytime shows today, it's almost like they've taken a page out of cable primetime news channels.
It's awful.
And they see that it rates well, which equals more money. Well, and now is there any going back from that?
Well, I think right now is with the fragmentation of media, right? And look, you're participating. It's just, we know this. You gotta, the influencer economy, the attention economy, it is, and I think if you're trying to survive in a legacy in financial environment like ESPN is, right? They've got to be personality based. So, and it feel as if daytime sports talk is trying to emulate, right? Stephen A. Smith is a Sean Hannity, by the way, a program he'll go on every once in a while. himself, or a Pat McAfee. It's.
Do you think McAfee is good? Let me ask you this though. I don't want to cut you off. Do you think McAfee is good for sports media? Because I'm conflicted on it. I think there's parts of it that are, but I got to be honest. To me, it feels like Stern of the late '90s watching his show, where it's kind of built for the lowest common denominator at times. It's
so shticky.
Yeah.
I can't. I only would watch at the show when Aaron Rodgers used to go on, because we're Packers fans in my house, and my son wanted to see the Aaron Rodgers updates. I could have cared less, but I would watch at it. And it's right. It's just sort of, it's just sort of a frat house. That said, I didn't want to like McAfee on game day. I enjoy his enthusiasm. I think he's good with the college kids. I think it's sort of, I actually think he's a good warm-up act for college game day. So I sort of enjoy him in that setting. But I'm with you. I don't get a lot of value out of his show.
No.
Because but I don't think he cares if you and I are watching. We're not his audience.
Yeah.
I just go, we're just not his audience. And, you've seen some of these YouTube shows that he sort of grew out of.
Yes.
It is sort of
I was
raw.
shocked when ESPN made the decision to basically seed those 2 hours and just say, here you go. Because it just brought...
They don't even own the show.
Yeah.
Which I guess they saw as a liability protector,
right?
Perhaps, right?
Yeah.
That he could take the incoming more than they would have to do. Look, I do feel like we and this is happening in cable news as well, which is there's a demand to be lower and lower in your debate. Everything has got to be a caricature of whatever the conversation is. And that's what's frustrating to me, right? I mean, that's what the Stephen A. Smith show is. It's a caricature of a conversation people might be having about Dallas Cowboys football, right? It's a caricature of the conversation people may be having about women's rights on some of these primetime shows. But it's always these absolute yell-a-thons back and forth about it. I just find it all to be a turnoff. But then, as I remind my wife, I'm aging out of the demographic next year. So it's very possible, that I'm the old man screaming into the void. And I think about that. I've always thought of myself as sort of understanding where new media is always going. And I was a product of new media. I came from a digital media background before anybody knew what that was in the 90s. So I always prided myself in sort of at least understanding it. But, up until sort of the perversion of social media in 2016, 2017, every new content added value, right? Every new medium seemed to add value, to bring a voice. Hey, I'm glad that guy's now around. I'm glad that woman has now got a voice in here.
Right.
We are in a period where now it's a grift, right? And I think I assume this will weed itself out too.
Yeah.
Because
you're more optimistic than me.
I just find, I just find it all repetitive. I just can't believe people just keep wanting to watch it. Like Stephen A. Smith. Really? The Dallas Cowboys are irrelevant this year. They're just irrelevant. And I get that, but if you're going to program your news based on an algorithm, which is in some ways what they're basing programming on, because this is how we all consume information, not to get off on a tangent, but I think the biggest problem we have in the information ecosystem are algorithms. I'd get rid of all of them and go back to timeline. Pure timelines, pure and simple, where people have to get an audience the old-fashioned way. They earn it.
Well, it's feel. It's almost like in baseball, it's managing by feel and eyeball test versus sabermetrics. There's something.
Yes, I guess. Yeah, you're right. I hate to, but I do feel like we now program based on data that is, I think, flawed data, because it's social media algorithm data, personally. But anyway.
Yeah, but that's why I'm comparing it to what's happening in the moment and making a decision in a baseball game based on feel and what you're seeing in that moment versus, in his career, he's 7 of 14. Who cares about career? What's happening now? What's happening in that moment is what I'm saying.
Right. You know what really grinds my gears, Jason? No, sorry. I feel like I'm speaking of these analytics. I'll tell you one thing that I can't stand. Don't tell me. I don't care about win probability when I watch sports. Do you know why I watch sports? I watch sports for the improbabilities.
Yeah.
I never watch sports for probabilities. And you know what you don't talk about at the office? Oh, wow, boy, that game was a blowout. Next question, right? Like, no, you talk about Hail Marys. You talk about big upsets. You talk about, oh, my, I just find that, like, look, this was my big argument about when Florida State was left out of the playoff because they had an injury. You know what was really fun in 2014? When Ohio State won the national title with a third-string quarterback. You were kind of it was an improbability.
Cardale Jones.
They led Ohio, right? It would have been interesting to see if Florida State could find a way to stay competitive, right? It would have been intriguing. It would have been a storyline. It would have been an improbability. And it just bothered me that it was sort of like, no, because statistically, we assume that there's a 70% chance this is a blowout.
Right.
And look, I'm aware this is the ESPN Invitational. It is not necessarily a playoff, and we shouldn't call it a playoff. It is ESPN is running this college football playoff. It's an invitational, and as my friend Tony Kornheiser likes to say, it's a TV show. And ultimately, it's a TV show. And Alabama, Michigan was a heck of a lot more interesting than anything else they could have put together. So, and they spent a lot of money, so I get it. I'm aware financially,
right?
And I'm a capitalist. I get what shareholders demand. But I do wish we went back to getting out of the. We don't have to show every statistic on TV just because we have one.
Let me ask you one more sports question. Juan Soto, free agency. I have a colleague I work with on this show every day. Who's a huge Nationals fan. He's from the DMV down there.
Good for him.
And he's hoping there's a chance Juan Soto winds up back in DC. Knowing the landscape down there, do you think the Learners would throw the wall at him? I saw you tweet something a couple weeks ago.
I was really disappointed in the Lerner owner letter. Look, I know there's a dispute inside the Lerner family about whether to keep the team or sell the team. They lost a lot of money during COVID because they own a lot of commercial real estate in the Tyson's Corner area, which is a big area. Instead of being worth $5 billion, they're worth $4 billion, which you and I might say, hey, but they did lose 20% of their net worth, right? So I'm not that must have mattered to some of them. I think Mark Lerner wants to do it, right? I do think he wants to be the owner. I think he likes being the owner. And I believe him when he says he doesn't want to sell. But I assume he has a cap of what I hope he makes a real effort. I think he owes it to our fans. I have a thesis on Soto that I think, he was really upset when we traded him because this was the place he lived the longest, more than anywhere else, right? Outside of the Dominican. This was his American home. This is where he learned English. This is where he brought his family. So there's always been a part of me that thinks that we could have while we're not the hometown, we're the first town. And that if we were competitive, right, if all things were equal, he might pick us. I do believe he will stay on the East Coast. He's got family in the Dominican. I just don't believe he's going to go out west because that's suddenly a 7.5-hour flight, okay, to go to the Dominican versus, and by the way, New York, DC, and Miami all have Dominican communities where I think he would feel comfortable, feel at home, and all of those things. So I'm hopeful, but I'm realistic. I mean, we know it would be like I said, as a season ticket holder, I want to know that they put a 15-year, $600 million deal on the table, even if it's rejected. I'd like to know you made the real effort because they did not make the effort with Harper. And that stings. And we ended up learning that about 2 years later, right? Harper finally fessed up and turned out Harper, I think, and his wife, because he got married here, right? I think they did have friendships here. All things being equal, he would have stayed. So that that disappoints me. But I just can't imagine the learners offering even the same amount of money as Steve Cohen, right?
Yeah.
I just can't imagine it.
Yeah.
And I don't expect Hal Steinbrenner to offer the same amount of money as Steve Cohen. I don't think anybody's going to outbid Steve Cohen. The question is, do you want to be a Met? And I say this like I don't, because Soto said something very interesting. He likes playing in World Series. He likes to win. And while I think Cohen's an owner that wants to win, the track record of the Mets is a mess, right? Even when they try to win, they do it the wrong way. And but I kind of think until they rehab their farm system, until they build a franchise, almost do what the Orioles did, right? Rip it down and build it back up so that you have it. And there's certain franchises here that you feel like have done it the right way. The Orioles, the Padres, right? They have just they brought it all the way back to the ground up. The Mets never did that, and I think that's why they are just sort of wild card kind of guys, right? They can get competitive, but can you have where you have a well of young talent that you can always use to trade for something, right? I mean, look what the Padres do constantly, right? And now the Orioles are in that position. The Dodgers have been in that position. So that would be what I think Soto's going to be really smart about this. I think he does care about, does the franchise have a chance to compete for at least 5 years?
Chuck Todd is NBC News Chief Political Analyst. He's hanging out with us on SportsWrap. I want to pick your brain on a few political things, and then we'll let you go and enjoy your weekend talking with him about sports. Great insights. I love it. We're going to come back, do more of this on SportsWrap. Don't go anywhere. Some big news from the world of SportsWrap. We are getting bigger. That's right. The SportsWrap with Jason Page Substack is launching next Monday, November 4th. Subscribe now for free and preview all this new source for sports has to offer. The SportsWrap starting 5. Let's begin there. Each morning, get the 5 topics in sports, along with my take in a tidy package. You got 5 minutes? That's all you need. I'll give you the top stories with a side of opinion. Watch it in the shower, breakfast, on the commute to work. Then we're going to have insider picks. You often hear us give some passing sports betting advice on the show. It's not all we talk about, but it's a small portion. But each night, before the games tip, we'll have our top picks posted by our experts. Whether it's football, basketball, hockey, baseball, golf, auto racing, or anything else you can wager on, we'll help you pick some winners. And we'll do it with transparency. We won't just post the winners. We're going to have extended interviews for you. Ever watch SportsWrap and wonder if there was more to the conversation? Well, there probably was, but we only get an hour on the TV show each day and a half hour on the weekends. SportsWrap Substack subscribers will get the whole conversation, unedited, every single second. Behind the scenes, you want to do it? You get our best on SportsWrap 7 days a week, but sometimes when the red light is off, the conversations are just as interesting. See those exchanges exclusively within Substack. That is going to be another perk for subscribers. We're going to have giveaways. With our upcoming paid subscription model, we'll get more than content for you. We'll have giveaways that are exclusive to our Substack community. Don't miss out on everything from tickets, memorabilia, and a whole bunch more. Merch. That's what the kids call it, right? Merch. SportsWrap merchandise is coming. We're the name of your new favorite sports media brand. Discounts for those in the club. And that's our Substack subscribers. Are you ready? The fun starts on Monday morning, November 4th. Subscribe now. You'll be glad you did. We continue the conversation on SportsWrap, and thrilled to have NBC News Chief Political Analyst Chuck Todd hanging out with us on the show. So I picked his brain on sports thoroughly. Now I got to pick his brain on politics to an extent because, like I said, if I had it to do, I tried for a couple of years when I got let go from NBC Sports Radio. back in 2016, I said, you know what? I'm going to try my hand and go into news. And the problem was it was the Tony Soprano syndrome. Everybody knows you as a sports guy. MSNBC used to have me on every weekend to talk about sports stuff. When I'd say, I want to come on and talk about politics, they'd just look at me and be like, we'd love to have you on to talk about sports stuff, but we don't want to talk to you about politics because you're just a sports guy. You're just, it doesn't matter what you did in your past. If what you've done for the last 20 years is sports, that's what you are.
I have a couple of sports writer friends that are frustrated. Kevin Blackiston, who I think should be just a national columnist, who just happens to use sports as a backdrop. He's a journalism professor and all, but he gets pigeonholed as sports guy right now. Look, he makes a good living doing that. LZ Granderson's another one.
Love LZ.
Who would love to be more, I think, in the politics and culture space, but I think he gets pigeonholed as, well, you're a sports guy. You're on the ESPN, et cetera. So no, I get it. And look, vice versa. Like those of us, hey, I got a lot to say about this, but what really are my credentials? They're about 30 years old,
Right.
So it's a tough sell.
Election day and the lead up to it is a bit like the final weekend of the NFL regular season, where you'll look on a page and it'll have all these scenarios. Your team could get in if A, B, and C happens.
Yeah.
It feels like the Electoral College Map is sort of that version of it for politics. You have all these scenarios that exist for one candidate or the other to win.
No, that's fair. And like a playoff scenario, there's one game that has an impact on like 7 different paths, or 7 different teams of what happens in their tiebreakers and all that stuff. Well, we do have some states matter more in how you build your 270 than others, and then do the poll closing times and how fast the state counts votes. I've been telling people, look, if you want to pull the all-nighter with us, I would do it, because I do believe by sunrise Wednesday morning we will know who won North Carolina and Pennsylvania. And the reason I single those 2 states out is because how those states split or don't split, right? If the same candidate wins both, ball game. That's as close to checkmate as you can come. It's not over, but it's really, really close. For instance, if Trump wins Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Georgia, that's
a wrap. Yeah.
He can lose everything else. He'll be right at 270. He could lose everything else. If she wins them both, if she wins Pennsylvania, she's going to win the other 2, Michigan and Wisconsin. And I think those 2 are always, she's more likely to carry them even if she loses Pennsylvania. But if she wins Pennsylvania, well, then she doesn't even need North Carolina. But if she obviously won that, but if she won North Carolina and didn't win Pennsylvania, then all of a sudden the Western states matter, right? It's like having will the Sunday night game matter to the playoff picture? Well, it depends what happens on the Sunday 4 o'clocks. Will Arizona and Nevada matter? It all depends on how North Carolina and Pennsylvania split.
How badly has Mark Robinson torn down? Could he potentially tear down Trump? I mean, he's going to get annihilated in that governor race. Is there going to be enough trickle from that Harris could win North Carolina? Because I think she's going to win North Carolina.
So I will put it this way. If she does win North Carolina, all the blame will be on Robinson.
Absolutely.
Okay. And I do think the only reason she has a chance is because of Robinson. I think and it's more than just his campaign has collapsed. It's sort of the fact that he is of MAGA, right? It allows there to be a bit of a connection to there. But it's a tough state for a Democrat to win. It's an easy state for a Democrat to get to 48. It's a really hard state for them to get to 50. I mean, a Democrat's only won it once this century. Obama in 08, North Carolina. But all the blame will be put on Robinson. But I'm going to leave you with this one stat.
Sure.
If the vote margin is essentially 30,000 or less, then we will be able to say Hurricane Helene, and Trump loses. We will say Hurricane Helene was the reason.
Wow.
Because our folks have estimated that it may cost him 10,000 votes. The displacement because it really it would hit western part of the state. Asheville is a big Democratic stronghold, so there's some impact to Democratic vote. But outside of Asheville, more on the mountain, that's a little bit more Trump vote.
Mm-hmm.
We think as many as 10,000 voters. So look, if the state's decided by 50,000 votes, you can't say those 10,000 were decisive. But if you're in that 20 to 30,000 range or less, which, we could be in 3 or 4 states may have margins that are that thin.
Yeah.
Then, everything matters, and including hurricane displacement.
We're having this conversation on Friday, November 1st.
Thank you for time. Thank you for time stamping that.
For context. For context.
Yeah.
By this time next week, will we have a declared winner in this presidential election?
I think we will. Let me tell you the scenario where we won't. Okay, because it's a very specific scenario, and it goes to if North Carolina and Pennsylvania split, with Trump winning Pennsylvania and her winning North Carolina, because then the late counting ballots, and that's just how it takes in Nevada and Arizona, especially in Nevada. I think Trump wins Arizona, and I think Trump wins Georgia. So ultimately, I believe that really Harris has 2 paths to the presidency. The northern path that everybody's talked about, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, or if she loses Pennsylvania, North Carolina plus Nevada. If Nevada is where if Nevada is the Florida 2000 moment, right, where we're all waiting on Nevada to find out who's president, then it won't be, we won't know by this time next week, and we probably won't know for a couple of weeks. That's how Nevada's, they'll litigate all these ballots. You political parties can take provisionals. You get a couple of days after election day to get the ballots, quote unquote, cured. If a provisional ballot's missing a voter signature or something like this, you can only imagine how many lawyers will be litigating whether, no, that ballot, that's not valid. Now that is a valid ballot, just like we saw, if you have any memory of 2000.
Oh, I do.
So if I'm just saying, I do think it's more likely than not we're going to know, frankly, by Wednesday at dinner time. Okay, I really believe that. But if we don't, that's the night. That's sort of the most. That's a fairly realistic nightmare scenario.
Yeah. See, I worry.
If I were to put my little probability percentage on there, somewhere in the 5 to 10% probabilities, which is quite high.
Yeah, I worry that the longer it drags out without a declared winner, you get the injection of the toxic rhetoric from certain people. Trump.
No, and the longer it takes, the more divided we'll be, and the more, look, I realistically, I don't expect us to have that the next president's going to be successful. I just don't, because I don't think half the country is going to accept that they have a mandate.
You're just punching me in the stomach, man.
I know. Well, I don't know how they can succeed anyway. It's going to be a divided Congress. We're going to have a Republican Senate, and I think it's more likely or not we'll have a Democratic House.
You don't think there's a shot? You don't think there's a shot in Nebraska and Texas? I know we've been talking about Texas forever potentially, but
I think but there's just the Nebraska guy's not going to caucus with either party, and even if they win Texas, they're not going to win Montana or West Virginia, and that's probably enough. So, look, the electorate has to look different than it does going into election day for Democrats to hold the Senate.
Understood.
We have to be, there's something where we'd have to be missing. A young voter surge, a lot more Republican crossovers. And, and that obviously if there's polling error, it's always possible on either side. Is it possible we're missing some, I do believe I believe the final voter is a Republican who doesn't like Trump. And if you think Kamala's too liberal, you're vacillating, you're struggling with this all the way to the end. And I don't think you make your decision to election day. So I do think that's an unpollable person, meaning I don't think any poll can show. So if there was a 2 to 4 point surge in Harris's direction, my presumption would be it came from that. It came from literally a late, just like this to me, it would be like the 2016 in reverse effect. All the late decider voters, the polls were not as wrong as everybody wants to say they were.
Right.
A lot of late decider voters just simply couldn't pull the trigger for her and decided, all right, at the last minute, they vote for him. That happens. Not everything you can find in a poll. Some things are unpollable. look, if you haven't decided yet, you're truly vacillating. You're going to take all the time you can. You're going to wait till the very last minute.
Yeah.
Because especially if you have to do something you don't want to do.
These
you wait till the very end.
These nightly primetime news shows. I've always been trying to come up a way with getting people to figure out more about what they agree on than disagree on. I'm not going like all Chris Cuomo crazy here, this new show on News Nation, but there is more that unites us than divides us. I have always thought that a great idea, and this isn't like the Seinfeld, everybody should wear name tags thing. I'd like to see Hannity go on Maddow go on Hannity, Anderson go on both of their shows, Hannity on with Maddow, on with Anderson. First of all, everybody knows who everybody is. So this idea that, you don't want to promote the competition. Everybody knows who everybody is at this point. So this idea that you're promoting your competition is silly.
Watch prime time anyway, right?
Why not? But if you bring these people together, I am convinced there will be a conversation that takes people out of the Fox ecosystem, out of the MSNBC ecosystem, out of the CNN ecosystem, and puts them all on at least closer to a same page. I mean, we used to see late night talk show hosts that wouldn't talk to each other. Now they all go on each other's shows at some point. Yeah. Like, why can't we do this? Why can't we figure out a way to do this?
I think some of them think that it would almost look like they were playing a part, meaning like they were almost fessing up that this was all an act. And
but they are now.
Well, I think it is, but I'm not, there are people that I work with who take it very seriously. So, and the producers take it very seriously. And so as much as I share your sort of eye roll feelings about this, I don't think it does anything but agitate people, right? I really believe these primetime shows, I have more conversations with relatives left and right where I want to say, just turn it off. Take a break from it. Turn off the MS. Turn off the Fox. Take a break. Go out. Take a walk. Go to the grocery store. I think we'd all love to see it. I think they all would fear alienating their own audience. They have so conditioned their audience that that person's the Antichrist or whatever. I think that they would be afraid of. Remember, they're all in this for their own financial gain. They're not in this. If they were in this for some other reason, I think they would have left this business a few years ago.
Yeah.
If you've chosen to stay in this business the way it looks now, right, and the way it works, and the way that the two political parties expect you to be partisan organs, right? Like, I mean, it was becoming impossible for someone like me at Meet the Press to even book Chuck Schumer, or because he'd rather go on a friendly broadcast. He saw us as anybody that wasn't friendly suddenly becomes unfriendly, right? Whether you're on the other side of the aisle or just in sort of accountability television. And I had a Senate Republican leader who I have a regular breakfast with who said, look, I don't do your show. It's not about you. I like you. I think you're fair. But if I answer your question, all of my constituents get mad at me. And you're just like, how have we gotten to this?
Yeah.
I will tell you this. A lot of cable TV hosts are afraid of their audience, and a lot of politicians are afraid of their voters. And that's why we have the behavior that we have.
If Trump picked Nikki Haley as his running mate, is this thing even close on election night?
No, but, I always love these questions. If Trump would only do X, and I always say, well, if Trump would do this, he wouldn't be Trump, right? Like, if the scorpion wouldn't sting the frog, the frog would still be alive when he took him across the pond. My wife will say to me, why does Trump do this? If he only did this, he'd probably win. I'm like, but then he wouldn't be Donald Trump. And that's what they believe, by the way. You talk to his campaign, they will tell you, if they pick Nikki Haley, his base would abandon him.
I don't think there's hold on. There isn't anything that he could do that his base would abandon him. We've already established this. You just had this Epstein stuff come out in the last 24 hours. They don't care, Chuck. You know this. I know I'm screaming at the sky. But you
of course. The old man yells at clouds.
Oh my God.
I hear you. I'm just saying that's how they think. And more importantly, I do think we should respect this following truth. The Republican Party is gone back to its sort of nativist roots of the 20s and 30s. This is not a new Republican Party. It's just this wing of the party is now ascendant. There's always been a nativist, isolationist wing of the party. Eisenhower beat it back, right? From Eisenhower to Bush, essentially had about 60 years where the Internationalist Chamber of Commerce wing of the party, the free traders, they were in charge. Right. And Nikki Haley's from that wing of the party. And there's the differences that these two wings of the party have are as distinctive as the differences between generic R's and generic D's. So I just think that they don't, and Trump views himself now as a movement, and Nikki Haley's just against him in the movement. So, in his mind, trying to fit the Nikki Haley's of the world into his first term was a mistake. Mm-hmm. So that's why he wouldn't do it. I agree. If he would at all reach out, hell, I think if he just did a town hall with her this weekend, it might be the difference. But, I just think we underappreciate the actual sort of ideological divide that truly is animating Republican politics right now. This is the 1930s Republican Party that the Charles Lindberghs of the world, were in charge of. It's a very insular looking party, right? We had immigration quotas back then. We had Smoot-Hawley was passed back then, which was a very tariff oriented way of dealing with the economy. So I do think we don't fully appreciate sometimes the actual ideological divide that has grown during the Trump era inside the GOP tent. This is why those voters are lost. Right. Like, these are my neighbors. I live in the last Romney precinct of Arlington County. Mm-hmm. Right. And I'm going to guess, based on your background, that you might consider yourself a recovering Romney Republican. I don't know, but if you work for Republican, yeah. More, I was raised an Eisenhower Republican. I mean, in fact, my dad wanted to name me Dwight David Todd. And so my mother didn't want me known as Ike. So they compromised. But the David is due to Eisenhower. Right. Like, that's my father. That was his model of what a public servant in his head was.
By the standards of like the gay community, because I identify with the gay community. I would be considered crazy conservative.
Oh, you're conservative
by the LGBTQ community. I would be. My husband, who's uber liberal, comes from Singapore. Yeah. He's like, you're conservative. Your dad is it's getting into you, that sort of thing. And I'm like, I'm really not. But that's, again, because I'm so moderate. That's again, you can't be. I once talked to a talk show host, gun-toting radio news talk host in Oregon one time, in Portland, and he said to me, he was carrying his gun around, and he was like, "So what side of the aisle?" I was like, "I'm moderate. I'm pretty independent." He goes, "Well, the only thing more useful than a moderate is an airplane with a screen door." That's kind of the way. There
was an old line, a guy, a longtime liberal activist in Texas named Jim Hightower, who was a fun little talk radio guy back in the 80s and 90s, a liberal talk radio guy. He used to say, the only thing in the middle of the road are yellow lines and dead armadillos.
It's very true.
But I really, it's frustrating to me. And, I had Bono one time called me a radical centrist. And I said, I don't know how, and I laughed at him, and I said, look, I know people think I'm a centrist. What I am is an incrementalist. I don't believe you can make major changes on the wings. Mm-hmm. I am a student of history. All major changes are incremental, and we go from the center out. Mm-hmm. The ideas may come from left or right, but they're always incrementally implemented. It's the only way you bring a diverse country along. It's the only way you bring a multi-ethnic, multiracial country along. And I think that, unfortunately, our politics, the expectation of our politics and how you actually conduct it, people are asking too much of their presidents. People are asking too much of their politicians. And it's because we've sort of this is the part of civics we don't teach, which is truly like how hard it is and by the way, I think it should be hard for a bill to become a law. If you're going to have something that affects 350 million people, you're goddamn right. I want to make sure it goes slow and every I is dotted and T is crossed, because you're impacting a lot of people. It shouldn't be passed willy-nilly. This is my argument against sort of, fast tracking things in the Senate. No, I'm stubborn about this. The founders had a point. Well, it is about, and by the way, if you do it slowly, you get buy-in. Social Security is a great reminder.
I feel like sports betting, that being jammed through the way it was, and people not thinking about the intended and unintended consequences of about sports betting. And I say this as somebody who loves sports betting, and we talk about it on this show.
I was just going to say, I love it, but I have a small G governor on myself. Mm-hmm. I'm aware of what I can and can't do. And I'm with Charlie Baker, and the state of Virginia is actually a little more responsible about what they allow you to bet on than what other states do. State of Virginia has a very strict definition of game of chance. So you can't bet on awards, any future awards, because that's technically not a game of chance, right? Somebody may know the actual outcome, but they also don't have any player props for college. And I think Charlie Baker is right. I think all player props are corruptible. Okay, like we've already seen the Toronto Raptor guy that got banished from the league out of suspicion of that. So you're right, and this is the downside of doing stuff through the great experimentation of the states.
Yeah. Last one. I feel like the Harris campaign. I went to her initial in 2015 or whatever when she announced she was running for president. I was at that Oakland rally. I happened to be living in Oakland.
2019. Yeah, it was a great 2019. January 19. Yeah.
I was there in 2019 at that rally.
Mm-hmm. That was her best day of the campaign trail, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, it was. It was incredible. But I walked away that day going, this woman could be president one day. And now we all know what happened during that campaign and what didn't happen. I feel like in this case, the Harris campaign has been overmanaged. Remember, this administration kept her pretty much under wraps until Roe v. Wade was overturned. Then they saw value in her, so they started using her. I think she's underestimated in her grasp of the facts and the big subjects, in her ability to speak on big ideas. And I think when this thing's done, win or lose, there's going to be a post-mortem done on this. I think she's just a lot smarter than people give her credit for. And I feel like they've held her back some. Am I wrong?
So I think this is what you're seeing. It's not necessarily that she's overmanaged, but have you ever been involved in the merging of two big organizations? And you don't want to offend anybody. You've got a project that's due. Everybody's still got to do it. You don't have time to decide who's in charge. I'm describing, obviously, the Harris and Biden teams having to suddenly come together to put together a 108-day campaign. I can tell that every decision's been overly litigated, meaning everybody's trying to get sign off. Everybody's trying to pay respect, and that's what you're seeing. So, for instance, if I'm going to pick nits at this campaign, and I will say this, I am picking nits because I think what, in the big grand scheme of things, what they have done with 108 days is remarkable. Okay, the fact that they have an even money chance to pull this off, given the circumstances they were in, the unpopularity of the sitting president, I think that this is not on her if she loses. Okay, hard stop. Every decision they've done has felt like it's the correct decision, but a week late, because I think they've litigated. Everything's been, so what you see as overmanaged, I would argue is essentially it's a version of the same thing, but it's more of everybody. There's too many people having to give their opinion about an idea. Too many cooks in the
kitchen, so to speak.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay, we got to do a Fox interview. All right, you should have done it at the end of September. They waited. You know what I mean? Like everything was overly litigated. But let me give you one more piece of what I think will make her a good president, but might be frustrating here for some. When you're a prosecutor, and you've always been a prosecutor, and she really always has been, right? You have to always have your facts straight, which is why she always has her facts straight. You can't take too many risks because you're speaking on behalf of the state or the city or whoever it is that you're doing. A trial lawyer gets to take risks because a trial lawyer has fewer cards in the deck to play. So they kind of have to take risks in order to get somebody who looks guilty to become not guilty. A prosecutor has all the evidence at hand and doesn't want to screw it up. So I do think she's simply naturally risk averse because of her background. I think a prosecutor, by the way, I think extraordinarily exactly what you want in a president, I would argue, which is you have all the facts at hand. You can't take too many risks. There are other places where risk taking is rewarded. In the presidency, it is you have 330 million people you're in charge of, right? So you better be a little more. You've got to be a little more middle ground, common denominator. So I do think those instincts are not always great on campaigns. It's why trial lawyers make such great candidates for office. They're willing to take a risk.
Right.
They're willing to try a phrase, to try something, an attack that maybe versus a prosecutor mindset. So there's something, this is one of those occasions where what I think is an incredible asset to the job itself can actually be a demerit in the attempt to get the job.
I got to let you go, but you have a prediction on election night?
I really don't. I mean, because I will tell you this, not to be my cop out. No. Right? I always say I can tell you what happened. Just let me know the result. Which is history's on the side of Trump, right? The mood music is with a generic Republican would have beaten a generic Democrat by 5 points in this presidential campaign. Okay. Just right. There's sourness about the economy, sourness about the direction of this administration, yada, yada, yada. So Trump has made this more competitive than it should be for his party. I think the data tells you it's just truly parity, and we're going to basically have a crash landing where we just have to figure out a winner, even if it's essentially a tie, kind of like 2000 and to a lesser extent 2004. But I would argue she's closing better. I think she's having a better last week. And if you asked the Harris campaign, what would you like Trump to do in the last week of the campaign? You might have him insult Puerto Ricans, threaten Liz Cheney's life, tell women he's going to protect them whether they like it or not, right? Like, I mean, if he loses, everybody's going to point to his last week as, my God, you were terrible. Yeah. Now, I happen to believe elections are won or lost a lot sooner than that. We sometimes put too much emphasis on the last seconds, the Comey letter, this or that. You're like, there was a lot more issues baked in than just the Comey letter, type of thing at the end. But that's where, if you believe the last 10 days matter, advantage Harris. If you believe fundamentals are the dominant aspect of every election, advantage Trump. The data says dead ass tie. And I am preparing for that because there's no other way to prepare.
Chuck Todd, Chief Political Analyst over at NBC News. This was amazing. I really enjoyed it. And hopefully you did because you stayed long enough. Let's do it again.
Baseball cards, yeah.
Yeah, please.
I'll find your eBay account. You got it. All right.
We'll do it again soon. Chuck Todd, always appreciate it. Thank you.
You got it, bud. All right.